three presentations, and then we'll open up the floor to a question and answer session. My name is Kamau Gashege, and I'm the founder of Gearbox, a platform that I'll be explaining about in a minute. We also have two other companies in our ecosystem. One is called Machine Africa Network of Industries, and the other is called Gearbox Europlacer, and I'm here to discuss all three with you this morning. And I also have two other people with me on this session. I have Dr. Tiwele from Ghana University, who's an expert on cybersecurity, and I also have Mr. Latif Gerono, who is General Manager at Gearbox Europlacer, one of our three companies, and also a director there. So let me begin with a bit of a description of our ecosystem. What you see on the slide is three companies. One, Gearbox Pan-African Network is the full name, Pan-African Network, and that's a non-profit entity. And then we have two for-profit entities, Machine Africa Network of Industries, and we sometimes use the acronym Machine ANI or Machinani. And we also have Gearbox Europlacer. So Gearbox was founded in 2014, and this comes out of my experience at the University of Nairobi, trying to create an interface between the university community and industry. And then benchmark. There are too many for the marketplace. In other words, many engineers will graduate and not be able to find work. And yet, for where we are, where we want to be, where we want to go in terms of our path to industrialization, we need more engineers. And so the task was, how can we make it so that whatever the engineers are doing at the university in terms of their learning and their experiences can be more than preparing them to go and work in companies like breweries, but preparing them to be able to develop their own innovations that can then be added to our economy. Because logically, they live here, they understand the problems, they can study them, and they can create solutions that are very custom fit to our own situation. But if you look around the industrial areas in our cities, you'll find that there are very few formal establishments that are run by Kenyans or Africans. And there's many reasons for it, and this is exactly what we were trying to tackle. And how we distilled it down, we said that the real thing that's really important towards being able to create a business in engineering is to be able to create a prototype. A working prototype that you can test the market with and then raise some money on the basis of the results that you get in your market pilot. We were excited generally in this nation, particularly the academic sector, by what happened with the birth of the Silicon Savannah, after we got M-Pesa especially as the real driver of a lot of tech-based business. We saw a lot of young people at universities being able to set up a kind of an app or some sort of solution that would work around M-Pesa and make money, create small companies that then move into larger companies. So this startup culture in Kenya was extremely exciting, but we were quite cognizant of the fact that it didn't really apply that well to engineering ideas, because it takes a lot more than having a good mind and a good knowledge of software and a good internet connection to start a business, which is kind of what's necessary. Not just that, but pretty much what's necessary for a software-based, like a fintech. But in engineering, you need to have access to machines. And so what we decided to do is to set up machines that people could access without having to buy them, without having to raise money. Because you can imagine, if you're trying to create a product, it will require you to have machines, and that can be a real barrier to starting. And so we said, why don't we pool machines together in one space, and then give people access to those machines to be able to develop their prototypes. And so we set that up. At the University of Nairobi, it didn't quite work out because there was a lot of bureaucracy. So trying to move things was very, very slow, and there were the administrative structures necessary to make something like that work were not really in place. And so we came out of the university and we joined forces with some of the local hubs, one in particular, the iHub, that a lot of people who are Kenyan will be very familiar with. And then we set this organization up called Gearbox, and we set it up eventually in 2017. Now it was in 2014. 2017 we moved to the industrial area, and we were able to get a lot of good results where people were able to prototype and even start small companies. I'll just show a video here that gives you a sense of the kind of equipment that we bought and what the space looks and feels like.
Video.
So the kinds of machines that we have are machines that can be broadly described as digital fabrication machines. We call them CNC, or computer numerical control. That means that the control of what you're seeing flashing across the screen that's creating the image on the piece of plastic is a laser in this case, and it's being controlled numerically by the computer. So it's part of automation. What you can broadly say is like the entry-level robotics. In this case, you're looking at a CNC mill, and it's milling a block of metal, and you can see that the lettering is coming out exactly as described on the computer. 3D printing is a similar kind of a process, except that instead of subtracting material, you are adding material coming out of a tube, is melting at the tip and creating structures as those that you see in the video. And so we have many of these machines available for people to prototype. Electronics is an extremely important part of where we are in terms of the global economy, the fourth industrial revolution. And so we saw fit to have the capacity to create circuits. And this machine here is called a robotic pick and place machine. It's taking the components and placing them on the board. And so people who design circuits locally are able to do so, and all the way to creating a full device that is in an enclosure and ready for the marketplace. We also ourselves make machines. So these CNC machines I described, this is a plasma cutter we're making for the Red Cross in Lamu. And we have a team of at least 10 people who we train and are able each individually to make such machines. And this number must increase as one of our targets, so that we have many people in the country that are able to generate such machines. This is our former head of engineering, who is creating a pipe bending machine, an automated pipe bending machine that's very important for furniture and all manner of items that require pipes to be bent. This is a machine called a roto molder that's making water tanks. So you pour plastic metal into the tank, that's a mold, it's a metal mold, and then the flame melts the plastic and coats the inside of that rotating disc and you get a water tank. And this we created so that it can be done at what we can call Juakali level, or the artisanal level. This is a company, the Gearbox Zero Placer. This video shows a machine placing the components on the board a lot faster than the one I showed you earlier. And Latif will go into depth regarding this particular factory that we have, which can create any kind of PCB or printed circuit board, which is what is basically you find inside of your phone, inside of your computer, and all manner of things in today's modern life require circuitry. That's why we decided that part of what we focus on will have to be the circuits. In terms of our core functions, what we do is, what we have done historically is, the core function is to create access to the machines through a membership. The membership model whereby we will charge people to come in and use the machines and build, and to be able to sign up to say, I'm going to use this machine today or that machine later in the afternoon, just like you would have in a gym. This model required that you pay about 10,000 shillings a month to have access and develop your prototype. We we found that this didn't work. Many of the prototypers or the innovators that we have in our community were not really ready to pay that kind of money. And so we adjusted the model a little bit, and we created Gearbox Academy. And in Gearbox Academy, you pay us as a lower fee to come in to actually learn about one kind of technology or another. And we have areas such as robotics, we have embedded systems, which speaks to having computers inside a device like a fridge that you might use, microwave. Any vehicle has many small circuits inside it. And so these embedded systems make possible all manner of technology that are synonymous with the modern life that we have. And so all these very cutting edge areas are what we offer on a short course basis. And we offer them for two types of people. One for a person who's an engineer who's already been trained or is in the process of being trained in engineering. But also there are people who have the engineering talent. Let's say that they have a God-given gift in engineering, but they haven't had the benefit of having a formal education in engineering. And such people can come in. We have a curriculum and pedagogy, meaning the way that we teach, that enables such people to plug in and be able to use some of these modern types of technologies with ease. They don't go necessarily very deeply in, but they can be very, very functional, very productive with that kind of approach as well. And the flexibility is one of the main characteristics of our academy. So this, being able to charge people to be at the academy helps us also to sustain, it's self-sustaining as we go forward. We also have been doing a lot of contracting. So you might have an idea that you have, and you come in, you're not an engineer, but you understand exactly what you're doing. Let me take an example of a water filter. Somebody needs to create or wants to create a water filter for, let's say, low-income families, because, of course, clean water is vital. And they know exactly how much it should cost, what size it should be, how heavy it should be based on their market research. They know in the homestead who is going to be using it, whether it's going to be attached to a faucet or for water poured out of a nyungu or something like that. And so all of this information about the market is critical. We call it human-centered design. And very often that has been done more effectively by somebody who understands the market rather than the engineer. So that person would then come to us and say, this is what I want you to make. And very importantly, that person should be able to pay for the engineering team to design what it is that they require. And this is the way that a lot of technologies are developed globally, and that is something that we have been doing. So contracting of our human resource within Gearbox is something that we've been able to do also to keep ourselves sustainable. I'd like to look at the bigger picture now and look at what it requires for any country to be able to keep up with what's happening in the fourth industrial revolution. The world, as you all know, the pace of change of technology in today's world is faster than it's ever been in history. And this is being described as the fourth industrial revolution. The first having been in the 1700s when steam energy was harnessed for mechanical power. And then about 100 years later, electricity was discovered, and we had mass manufacturing possible, and that ushered in the second industrial revolution. And then about 100 years after that, in the 60s, 1960s, you had the invention of the transistor, and computing came on board, and again, ushered in the digital revolution, the third industrial revolution. And now you notice that those first three revolutions were separated by 100 years each. Now, barely 50 years later, we're having what's being called the fourth industrial revolution, which represents a merger of electronics, software, automation of all types being made possible, biotechnology, and because of how many researchers in various universities are now having access to a lot of information and so on, the rate of change and development, even within companies, is faster now, and it means that the gap between poor countries and rich countries can either widen, or there's an opportunity if we can actually embrace these technologies ourselves and be able to be intentional about it. And I don't mean only private sector players, but I mean at a national level, at a governmental level, that we can also be able to use the very same industrial revolution to bridge the gap between us and the wealthier countries, and more importantly, to be able to take care of our own economic needs. So this slide shows work that was done by the World Economic Forum, where they have a council called the Global Council on Advanced Manufacturing and Production. I was a member of it for 3 years. And within the course of the work that we did, we created this model to try to determine how ready any country is for the fourth industrial revolution. So it's for policymakers in particular and members of, or other people who run very large companies and corporations to be able to understand what they need to do not to get disrupted by the pace, the very fast pace of technology. On the left, or on your left, yes, of this slide, you'll see something that says a structure of production. And that is like taking a snapshot of what any country is currently. So you're taking, and the way that you're defining the state of that country's economy is according to two parameters, one called economic complexity. I'll speak a little bit about that in the following slides. And then the other being the scale of the market. And so if you take these two together, the complexity talks about how prepared or how able the economy is to design new types of technologies. And it requires a lot of connectivity and connections between various parts of the economy. An innovation system in a nation that can be very responsive to needs and very easily able to take up technologies as necessary. On the right, then you have drivers of production. So if you was, say, the minister, or as we say nowadays, CS of industrialization or education, you'll be looking at this and saying, these are the levers. These 6 boxes here are the levers that I have at my disposal to be able to expand my country's economic sector or ability to be able to grow the economy on the basis of technology. So the first is technology and innovation, then there's human capital, there's global trade and investment, there's institutional frameworks, sustainable resources, and the demand environment. And so we ourselves place as gearbox in our ecosystem, universities in a country like ours, we place ourselves in the first 2 boxes, technology, innovation, and human capital. And the point of this slide is to say that even if those 2 are doing phenomenally well, that you have a lot of development in technologies in terms of prototypes and so on, and very innovative prototypes happening, and the human capital, people are being trained and educated. If those other 4 levers are not being also developed and expanded, then you'll find that you're not really getting that kind of innovation that's being created in centers like ours really impacting the economy. And the tragedy there is that because emerging markets like ours have been recognized by global money, investors all over the world, they're coming to invest in countries like ours. They already have developed their own national innovation systems to the extent that when they come here and they start to study what the market needs and how they can plug in, you as a Kenyan might have already developed a very good solution. But because the ecosystem is not mature enough, a foreigner can come in with the same idea, maybe, in fact, it might be half-baked, but they might have very good investment behind them and so on, and they'll overtake you and be able to implement the solution where you yourself find yourself in. So it's very important for us to be very deliberate about being able to develop and intentional as a government and as all the players necessary. In yesterday's session, a term was used, the triple helix. Some of you might have been there. And this is a terminology that's used very often to describe the way in which governments need to cooperate with academia, the various universities, and also with the private sector to create a national innovation system that really works. And so the national innovation system, in a sense, can be seen as a system that is able to almost automatically audit its own population for good ideas, for innovative people, and channel those people and those ideas to be able to get to the marketplace for the benefit of the economy. So rather than having people like we often see on television, people who may not even have had the benefit of a good education, somewhere in a rural area or even in a slum area, developing amazing technology, but just one instance of it. And if you look for them, you might have seen a story maybe 2 years ago, look for them today, and you'll find they haven't moved, they've done nothing, they're working in some mundane job and not really using that skill that they have. It means that the innovation system in the country is immature, it's not developed, and it needs to be intentionally developed so that it doesn't really matter whether or not you have a degree, there should be a channel that is made available for you to be able to now develop the idea that you've got, especially in the economy. When we look at the way that it can be done, we look at 2 things, and this is work that's been done in the US, the link is there. And this is imports into Kenya. This is 2019, so it's not new data, it's more like you find a more modern graph. But in this you find that refined petroleum is a major part. You've got medicines, you've got wheat, and all these different things. And we'd like to be very intentional as we look at the way that we try to encourage innovation. to see whether import substitution can be done deliberately. And if you go by the gearbox stand outside, you'll find that the hospital beds have been designed, and trolleys for the hospitals, drip stands, we've done doors and things like those, we're moving to showers and so on. And we're deliberately looking at some of the government policies, healthcare, affordable housing and so on, and saying if we can make some of the things that are being presently imported from outside the country, that would mean now we'd be returning those jobs back into the country. In other words, if you are importing as a nation, whatever you import is effectively an export of jobs. And so because the government is the biggest customer in any country, it behooves the government then to take the taxpayer money, which has been collected from all of us, and wherever possible, its own industry or its own industrialization. This is a very obvious policy directive, or if it were to be a directive. It's been done across Asia and so many different countries. But we find that it's a bit difficult to sort of get this message through here in the nation so that things can actually make a difference. That money will be spent locally. The second policy sort of is export substitution or export promotion, I'm sorry. And so in this case, we've got the tea sector, which is at that time in 2019, 18% of our economy, or our exports rather. We had about 10% cut flowers, 7% or 6.5% of refined petroleum, and coffee at about 3.6%. And so all of these need to be promoted, and we want to ask ourselves as an engineering community, how can we create a focus that will help us to be able to do better in many of these sectors so that we can promote our exports. And this graph here shows some connections between different parts of the economy that are important towards having a good productive sector in terms of manufacturing. And what you notice, all those blue labels are some of our most important exports. And the point about this graph is that the connections are very strong and very many in the dark area in the middle. And so any industry we have, if it's to be very competitive globally, should be in that dark area. But when you look at the graph, you notice that tea, for example, which is our biggest export, is very far away from the center. Same applies to cut flowers near the top and refined petroleum, and so on. And so it means that those organizations, I'll give you an example. Let's take a tea factory. If we take the same kind of a factory in Kericho or in one of our T zones, the likelihood is that to repair that same part, if it broke down, same scenario, they might even have to send that part to maybe a factory in Sri Lanka to be fixed, or India or somewhere like that, meaning that you won't get it back for a couple of weeks, and the cost will be much, much higher. So your competitiveness is high. And so the point is that if we're able to direct, again, not just as individuals, but in this triple helix mode, to direct our human resource and whatever we have by way of technologies in the universities and places like Gearbox, then we can actually very deliberately target certain sectors and certain strengths, which will include hardware and robotics, which is the title of this session, so that we can actually be more competitive as a nation and create more jobs for our people. So I think I'll only show you one or two samples of what we do as Machine Africa. We, as I said, we're looking at Gearbox doing the development of the designs and so on. Machine Africa will then take some of those designs and see whether they can apply them in the marketplace, and specifically looking to see whether we can give machines and methods to Juakali or artisanal manufacturers at a micro level. So as you all know, there's a lot of things that we consume as a nation that are made in the Juakali sector. All kinds of things made from metal, sheet metal and this and that, a lot of welding and so on. But the productivity is very low because the efficiencies are low. And so we thought that we should be designing machines that such people can use to be able then to up their own productivity and grow. And so that's what we focus on. And our idea is also to train people on how to do that. So when you look at the hospital bed, which is out there, and the other items I mentioned, including the doors made from fiberglass, Our goal is to train people coming from Juakali sector on how to do that, and then supply them with the parts and so on to do it, so that whatever they're making, like the hospital bed, meets exactly what the standards have been set by KEBS and the Poisons and Pharmacy Board, therefore that they can be accepted. Otherwise, those particular types of artisans will never grow. And if you look at many of them over the 50 years of independence, that is the case. And you'll find that the productivity we have in the informal sector broadly, 83% of the workforce in Kenya is employed in the informal sector. 83%. 17% is in the formal sector. People who are taxed by the government on their salary. And so, and a good portion of that is the people we're talking about, the metalwork artisans. If you then take the portion of the economy that informal sector, which includes farming and everything, what they contribute to the GDP, it's about 30% of the GDP. So that points at great inefficiency. That many people, 83% of the workforce producing 30% of GDP. It means that there's a lot of inefficiency in the informal sector, and there should be great focus, because if jobs can be created there, we then transform our nation. So a project that we also did with MasterCard Foundation and the Kenya Commercial Bank Foundation, which got disrupted by COVID, you can see the image there. We built a lot of greenhouses, and our job as Gearbox was to build the greenhouses, to train young people on how to build the greenhouses. And it was hydroponic farming. You can see the lower image there. There's a lot of metal, what we call A-frames with the plants growing in them that are fed through water with the right nutrients. And then there was another company which trained them on how to do the actual farming itself. So I think that's enough by way of examples. And for the purpose of this session, I think I will now hand over to Latif Cherono to continue with his own presentation on Gearbox Europlacer. He's going to come and share what Gearbox Europlacer is about, and then we'll hear from Dr. Kimwele after that, and then we'll have a discussion in which all of you can participate through a Q&A. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Let's continue with the session. Thank you.
Good morning, all. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. My name is Latif Cherono. I am the General Manager at Gearbox Europlacer. We are an electronics manufacturing services company. And what that means is that we provide services to manufacture and design electronics. And I'll speak a little bit more about that. We're part of the Gearbox ecosystem, that being Gearbox and Machine Africa. We've been in existence since 2021. Although we started really this idea of bringing a large-scale and world-class electronics manufacturing to the country in 2016. A little bit about myself. I am Kenyan, like most of you here. Grew up in Kenya, but I had the privilege to study in the United States, and that's where I got my experience in electronics manufacturing. So I really want to take you through the journey so we can understand why this is so important and why having such capacity here in Kenya can be transformative. So I'll explain who we are, what we do, the reason why, and how we can make this scale. So who we are is Gearbox Europlacer. And we provide services that go from designing to manufacturing to the support of IoT devices. And IoT means the Internet of Things, right? A device that can collect data anywhere in the world and transmit that data to you to be able to extract insights and provide services and value to the person who is getting your service from. Right? Well, Dr. Kamal, you missed this slide of all the people who have visited Gearbox, and we've been privileged to have from Tony Blair to our former president to even Mark Zuckerberg, who visited us, right? So let's break down this idea of electronics and why is it important, right? Every one of you in this room has a phone, and you can most of you can remember when you didn't have a phone and how much of a challenge that was with interacting with daily life, right? And the essence of a phone is really the electronic side. It's able to transmit data, it's able to compute data, it allows you to connect with the world and opens up so many opportunities. When you think about that phone, do you ever think about where it was designed, where that phone was manufactured, right? If we look at a phone and say, okay, let's take an Apple phone, for example. Where was it designed? So it was designed in the United States by, of course, the Apple Corporation. Where was it manufactured? It was most likely manufactured in China, and some of them are manufactured in India. And then where is it used? It's used all over the world. And if you look at that entire value chain and you say, where is the most, who captures most of that value in that particular product? Apple, the company that designs that product, captures about 93% of the value of that product. The manufacturing portion is about 5 to 6%, and then a little bit with the distribution in that. So you can see why it's important to be able to design electronics hardware. Now let's bring that home to where we are in Africa. We have multiple challenges in our daily lives. If you live in Nairobi, you don't get water all the time. When you're going to work, you're sitting in traffic to work and coming back from work, right? If you are in the farm, trying to predict weather patterns, predict your harvest, it gets to be quite difficult, right? So you're doing all this based on trial and error. So this is where the power of the Internet of Things can come in to help solve these challenges that you're facing, right? And if you've spent some time in this seminar and looked at some of the startups who are here, many of them are using hardware to solve those problems, right? And I'll give you a couple of examples of the startups we've been privileged to help in the design and manufacture of their products. So Mobi Water is a Nairobi startup based on managing water utilities in Nairobi. So what they do is they provide IoT that's connected to water meters that allows you to collect the data about how much water you're consuming, whether there's losses within the water system, and to enable you to be able to plan your water usage. EcoBoda is an electric mobility company based in Nairobi. They're retrofitting electric motorbikes coming from overseas, but retrofitting them with giving value to us in Kenya. And how are they doing that? If you're buying a motorbike, for example, the Boda Boda guys that you see riding every day, they may not have the capacity or the capex to buy that motorbike outright up front, right? So they want to be able to pay for that motorbike in small installments. So where EcoBoda can come in and say is that we will provide an IoT device that goes into this electric mobility vehicle that allows you to pay for your vehicle on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. And the security for the person who owns that asset means that this bicycle or this motorbike is tracked, so it can't get lost. Beyond that, the IoT device provides data about how the motorbike is performing, which is very helpful in after-sales service and that. So you can see where having technology can add multiple verticals in value and in service, right? Another good example is a company called EcoBistro. Now this is a really small startup based in Meru, and what they're doing is trying to manage moth infestation in farms, right? So if you're farming and you have moth infestation, that means that the moths are going to come to your farm and eat and lay larvae, which will ruin your crops, right? So where EcoBistro is saying, how can we solve this using technology? So as opposed to using pesticides to control the moths, they're actually using UV lights to attract the moths at night, and then being able to trap the moths with a very innovative structure, right? So this device, while it sounds simple, it actually has quite a bit of IoT, because in that you need a solar charger to be able to charge this device because it's out in the farm. It has no access to power. It needs to be intelligent to understand when it's going to turn on, when it's going to turn off, to be able to capture the moths in the most opportune time that they're flying, right? and then to be able to collect that data to say, how is this device performing, right? So that's how IoT and technology can really help solve the challenges that we're facing. Let's take it like a step back and understand what can this do for Africa as a whole, right? What we know is coming in Africa for anybody who's able to design an IoT device and test it in Kenya, for example, with all the economic regional blocks that are coming on the continent. So for example, EAC, where we are, COMESA, which extends all the way from Egypt down to Zambia, and then the big one, which is the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement. It means that if you have a product, an IoT product that is solving a real problem in Kenya, you'll be able to access the rest of the African market with huge tax incentives that somebody who's coming from overseas may not be able to access, right? And if we're looking at what can be transformative from an economic standpoint, that is it right there. Being able to say you can offer an intelligent solution that's solving an African problem that's been designed in Africa, manufactured in Africa, and deployed in Africa. We can even take another step beyond that and say, can African products add value across the world? I say yes, because when we live here on this continent, we live in a very lean way. We live not having a lot of resources at our fingertips, right? So when we're designing products, when we're designing solutions, you're designing them with the bare minimum, right? Which means that it's efficient in its deployment. Its cost is very effective. So you can imagine if you design a product that solves livestock tracking, for example, and you've designed it in Africa where access to cellular networks maybe in remote regions is not very good, but you're able to figure out that problem. That solution that you have is now applicable across the rest of the world, right? And at a cost that would be much lower than your competitor would be facing. So it's up to us here on the continent to be able to build that capacity from the design of a solution to the manufacturing of that solution to the deployment of that solution, so we can not only capture our market here, but extend across, across the world. And I have a couple examples here for you. So in this little bag, I have a little a PCB here. It's quite small. Size, it's maybe 10 centimeters by 6 centimeters. But this little PCB that I'm holding in my hand is essentially a computer, right? It has 8 gigs of memory, 64 gigs of RAM, and it can be used in a multitude of solutions. But what's more important about this is that not only was it designed or manufactured here in Kenya, it was actually designed in Kenya by Kenyan engineers, right? So if we're talking about can we manufacture phones in Kenya, we can actually design phones in Kenya, right? And if we go back to the beginning of my talk when I talked about where is the value in electronics, the value in electronics is in the person who owns the IP, who owns the design of that product. And that's where our focus needs to be. Where are we in Kenya in that statement? We're actually quite ahead when we're looking at many of the African markets here. And why? One, we have a huge population of well-educated young people, young engineers, who have been trained on looking to put their skills to use in solving and creating innovative solutions. Two, there's a lot of money coming into the region to help startups, right? So if you're a startup, there's a very good chance that you can get the funding to create your startup to go from a POC to an alpha to a beta to a prototype. But most importantly, why many of the IoT companies in Kenya are succeeding is because they can build their products on M-Pesa. And what does M-Pesa do? It means that you can provide a technology solution to your end user who can connect to it via mobile money, right? So it's very easy for you to access a market, very easy for you to deploy that solution, right, and add value. And we can see that mobile money is going to propagate across the continent, right? Many other African countries are seeing how can we add digital money to our economies. So if you've created a solution here in Kenya, trust me, you'll be able to scale your solution in West Africa, in South Africa, right? And our data has actually shown us that when it's coming to IoT development, Kenya is actually leading in terms of innovation in IoT. So we really are the hardware capital of the continent at the moment, right? But we have to keep that pace. We need to invest, right? And that needs to happen on two levels. It needs to happen from a policy standpoint with the government to be able to say, what are the incentives from a research and development standpoint to startups? What are the incentives for outside companies who want to come and invest within this sector of hardware manufacturing, right? And then it also has to happen from the private sector. What can be done to create the environment to help startups scale? What can be done to create the environment for multinational companies to interact and collaborate with startups who know the lay of the land, who know the context of the solutions that, or the problems that we're facing, to be able to create collaborative approaches. And that's where I believe we've been able to succeed so far. And with the right type of policies and engagement, I believe that we can go very far into the future. Right? So my takeaway from my talk that I would like you to go home with is we're not, assembling phones is not just something we can do. We can do much more than that. We can design phones. We can design laptops. We can design the products that will add value to our economy. And it's already happening. And all you need to do is to just walk around this building that we're in and interact with some of the startups that are adding value and see exactly what is happening from a technology side and from a hardware side. Okay. If you do have any questions, I'm looking forward to the roundtable discussion and hoping to engage with you throughout the day. Thank you very much.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Michael Kimwele. I'm a senior lecturer at the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. I'm happy to be here to share some of my insights, experiences, and I'm happy to see that majority of you in this room are young, but though young is relative, unfortunately I don't have a presentation, but I'll be able to pass my message to you. Over the years I've taught in the university, I've realized that there's a lot of talent among young people. And one of the things I would want you to remember going forward is the fact that local problems require local solutions. Lord, let nobody tell you out there that they understand much more of what you do more than you. Based on what you do, you can be able to think around the challenges you have, which in my own view, I consider them to be opportunities. I'll share with you two cases. In May this year, 3 of our students won in the Huawei global competition. And unfortunately, when I talked to some, I realized one of them was not even doing ICT. So I've just met somebody in the morning as we were waiting for this session to start. Then I realized he's following his passion. He did a totally different thing, but he has realized that innovation is the way to go. And that's why he's here to be able to network, beat other people. What happened with that team which won, they took the first prize, was one of the fellows who was not even doing ICT, he's doing clinical medicine. The problem they were given to solve was in health. So he ended up being the domain expert. He didn't have any ICT knowledge, but was able to provide his expertise, and they ended up solving the problem in the right way. I am sure there are some of you have, they may consider themselves to be in the wrong careers, And I remember where I met Honorable Victor in another innovation which was organized, in another forum which organized by Mozilla in the Arboretum a few weeks ago. We met another student who came out with another innovation to help people choose careers based on their grades and also their passion and so on. And I've been able to link up these people with the Kenya universities and the college's central placement service. It's only that they are busy, but they'll be happy to embrace this team and try to see in which they can work with them. Because it has happened that those people find themselves doing things which they don't like. Majority of them don't finish. Because that it is your passion and zeal which makes you wake up in the morning, go to work, spend long hours to try to do something. So if you follow something you are passionate about, it is likely to work. So for me, what is shaping, because our discussion was on robotics and manufacturing, what is going to shape the innovations and the manufacturing industry going forward are things like what Latif and Dr. Kamau was talking about, specifically IoT. So if you can be able to come up with innovation around the Internet of Things, to be able to monitor what is going on in places and other things, then you can be able to show people that this works. And I would want us to embrace an approach which I've seen it work. You have the talent, but there are also other people from where they see to know the direction they want to take. Forums like this one by Nairobi City County are very good because there is the vision which Nairobi City County has. But now when they come to you and tell you we would want people to come up with solutions around waste management, around traffic control, around slum upgrading and so on, you should be able to think around that. Create synergies with your friends, see ways into which you can be able to start small, and then going forward you'll be able to come with something. Don't fear reaching out to people. Some of us have ideas, but we keep every other thing to ourselves. So the other thing which is going to shape this as we go forward is a virtual reality. So going forward, people are coming out with designs which are a bit more friendlier, because from where you sit, you would want things which are appealing to you and so on. So that's also something you should be looking around for. Dr. Kamau talks about reprinting. I don't want to dwell so much on that. Around us, there is a lot of data which is being generated, and there is a lot of research and other things which can be done around big data. So which application can you be able to come up with innovations around the same? So these are things which going forward every other person is keen on. But like I've said in my beginning, it is us in the African continent who can be able to solve our problems. We understand what it is that we want to do. So it's important that we do this in the best way possible. Of course, your talk from engineering, he has talked about robotics. Robotics are also good. But from a manufacturing point of view, there needs also to be a balance between how much automation can be able to do and also the human element. But even when you talk, you travel and you also talk to people from other countries and look at what they are doing, it will take a long, long period of time before we, if at all this will ever happen, before we get to replace human beings completely. Because there is that which you cannot outrightly automate and also replace. So your space in the innovation ecosystem is still there. Because all these, whether they are robots, whether they need to be programmed, people need to create new interfaces for them and so on. So the other thing which is also important as you think about innovation is what I may call business process reengineering. Look at anything which has been automated and also look at ways in which you can either make it better, reduce some of the sub-processes and so on. Because based on the many applications you use and the many things you do, there are things which you may find yourself not comfortable with. And that shows some uniqueness in your thinking, your way of doing things. And by looking at what you do and the many things around you, you can always be able to come up with something which will spur innovation and also make people think about ways in a better way. So with that, I would be willing to take some of your questions and also any comments you may have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Kimwele. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your patience. And now this is a session where we have a panel discussion that will invite you to ask questions. And I think from what you've heard, we've covered what activity happens at Gearbox as a part of an innovation system that's trying to promote industrialization in this country. Then we've had a discussion of a particular instance, which is for electronics manufacturing, which we've hopefully been able to show is a very essential sector for industrialization broadly because of the fourth industrial revolution. And then we've heard an overview from Dr. Kimwele around what is really changing in the world, how especially young people need to maybe position themselves for the future that's coming. And he's also an expert in cybersecurity, and that is it links up with what we've discussed from the point of view, especially that as all these countries in the world are trying to keep up, even the very, very big companies that have been manufacturing for many years, the examples you heard about Apple and so on, because of the way technology changes, they need to be on the cutting edge of what's happening. And the systems that they use are more and more on the internet, interconnected, and cybersecurity is a very important part of how you can keep your secrets secret, if you like, and so on. So these are things that we want to invite you to ask about. And to maybe kick off, I'd like to maybe speak a little bit to one thing in particular, and that is how an electronic manufacturing sector can be developed. It's also abbreviated as EMS. Again, with what we do at Gearbox Europlacer, you saw the video, you saw how it is that we can make the circuits like the one that Latif held up. This is something that's been done. There's about maybe 3 companies we know of right now in Kenya that can do similar, except that you know, the difference may be in quality and so on, but it means that something is already starting to happen in this country around manufacturing of electronics. Very different from assembling a phone, and that's the point that Latif was talking about. If you get a circuit like the one he held up that was designed in China or some other part of the world and brought here, and all you're doing is assembling, then you're not really gaining the full value that can be gained because the IP is somebody else's, right? Techno is a huge company. It's become a unicorn, meaning it has a valuation of more than $1 billion. It was set up for the African phone market from China in Ethiopia, and they do a lot of assembly there, but the actual circuitry and the IP resides in China. So these are interesting questions. How do we position? And I want to start with a question to you, Latif. We heard the president make an announcement that Kenya is soon going to have a 4,000 or 5,000 shilling phone that's manufactured in country. Can you maybe speak to that point with the background I've just given? How important is that, and how perhaps best can it or should it be done?
Great. Thank you for that question. So, should it be done? Absolutely. And why is because a phone is the most transformative device somebody can have, right? It can change how you interact with your life from an economic standpoint, from a social standpoint. There are lots of benefits. Then the next question is to say, how do you do that, right? So the phone, being quite small, it's actually a very complex device, right? You've got your hardware, you've got your software, and this goes back to what I said in my talk, is you need to be able to have the capacity to design and have the capacity to design your own phone. And then you may say, why? Why would you want to design your own phone if you can get a phone from elsewhere? Local context is extremely important, right? How we use our phones and interact with our phones here in Kenya is very different from how somebody else in Japan or in China may do. So if we're able to find the value-adding IP in that, it means that then we can leverage the power of that IP in a solution that can be scaled across the continent, right? So we definitely need to do that. But it's something that cannot be done, or it can't be done overnight. You have to build that capacity, right? So even as we're saying we will start with the basic assembly of a phone, that is great because that's the start of a journey. But the path has to be, how do you keep increasing value on that journey? So maybe you start by doing basic assembly. Then you have to start by doing more complex manufacturing, which is SMT manufacturing, how you get to this PCB, right? At the same time that you're doing that, you need to be thinking about how do you build capacity in the design of that product. So 5 years, 6 years from now, you've started off with something that wasn't yours, but 6, 7, 10 years later, you actually have something that you were building, right? And you own that IP form. And we've seen this done over and over again in multiple other economies. You've seen it in China, you've seen it in India. It's happening now in Vietnam and Malaysia, right? Next question is, why Africa, right? If you look at the supply chain of electronics and the political and economic situation that's happening across the world, supply chains are looking to be more diversified, and companies and governments are looking for alternate supply chains from what currently exists. So this presents us with a very good opportunity to leverage this capacity, right? In our own company right now, we're getting inquiries and business opportunities that are coming from the West, from startups who are saying, we do some of our manufacturing in the Far East, but we would like to have this manufacturing done closer to us, in a closer time zone, in a region where we can communicate easier through English, not having to do translation, which makes business much easier. So all these things are opportunities that we can leverage here in Kenya. But we have to think of it as a long-term plan and understand what do we need to put in place to ensure that happens.
Well, yeah, and speaking especially to that point, the audience should be aware that what we do at Gearbox Europlacer has been done in countries like South Africa for at least, maybe 20 years, maybe longer than that. They have several companies that are doing the same thing. And yet, the electronic manufacturing sector in that country is not as developed as it is in a country like say, Malaysia, or some of the ones he mentioned, Vietnam. And even Egypt has a policy that seems to be very, I suppose, it's creating growth in the electronic manufacturing sector. So what are the specific things that need to be done? And when I look at it, I think, for example, of the Buy Kenya, Build Kenya policy that we've heard about for at least the last 10 years, and even before that, it was in some way, shape, or form, maybe with a different name, the same idea. That if, for example, KPLC needs to buy the Kenyan utility, for those who might not be Kenyan who are watching online, needs to buy meters for homes, and now we're moving to smart meters. The government should possibly put up a system that says we should have people develop the meter in Kenya. But if they can't do that right now, or if it doesn't meet all the standards, then maybe we create a plan and say, we're going to rope the universities in from a research perspective, any companies that are relevant, and in 2 years we want to have that thing ready. Those sorts of policies. Can you maybe speak to what needs to be done that South Africa missed, for example, and countries like Egypt are doing, and what we should be able to emulate from some of these examples?
Sure. So really, I think there are 3 things in that. Number one is to say, where is the IP coming from, right? You're going to make a product. Who owns the IP? Where is that going to come from? So you need partners in that. And that comes from either a multinational corporation that wants to deploy their product on the continent. Could either come from startups who want to license their product, or it can come in building IP internally, right? And that leads into the second part, capacity building. And this is where you have to have universities in tune with what is happening with the industry, so you're building the right skills with the right path of technology advancement, right? As we all know, technology is dynamic. It doesn't stand still. So you have to be building upon the skills that you've learned prior, right? And it's continually moving. And then the last thing that you need is really the environment that allows this thing to flourish, right? And what does that mean from an environment standpoint? It means policies. It means what are the trade incentives that can be put in place. I mentioned some of that before, the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, some of the economic incentives we have with the US, the UK, with Japan and such. So if you can look at these three things and create a roadmap that allows each one of them to leverage each other, then really you've got a path for success. And this sector is growth positive, meaning it will grow by a factor of 10 over a decade. And I'll give you 2 data points. So Egypt, with their policy called Egypt Makes Electronics, within 20 years, they've been able to go from a sector that was hundreds of millions into a sector that is now, I think, worth $1.6 billion. Right? The next one is India. India was able to quadruple their output in electronics with a policy called the National Policy of Electronics for India. And that policy is actually going into version 2 based on the success that it's had over the last decade. So we just need to look at those examples and see how we can tailor fit that for our region.
Okay, so I think let's open it up to the floor. Yes, I think we have another microphone up here. Can you? I'll give it to you, and then she can take it and share it around as necessary. Just your name and what your affiliation, and then your question, please, very briefly.
Hello, can you hear me now? Okay, so hello everyone, thank you very much. My name is Ian Mudomi, CEO and founder of Vision Drill. We are basically personalized training platform. We also allow networking. So my question is to you, Latif, where I saw you holding the PCB. You mentioned that it's 8 gigabytes of memory and 64 gigabytes of RAM, right? First question is, how much does one of those cost? And then the second question is, I heard you talk about the smartphone, 4,500, something like that. And as Gearbox, is that something you're working on? I also heard about, there's this project, I don't know if it died or it's still ongoing, by the government, the laptop project, if you are also participating in that or the hardware for those laptops. Yeah, those are my
Good questions. Please, Latif.
Great. Wow, that's quite a bit. So on the device that I mentioned, this is actually a prototype device to be used in IoT, right? And the reason why it has so much capacity is because it's designed to do a lot of computation on board, on the edge. I wish I could say more than that, but I can't, just due to the device itself. But when you're talking about cost and hardware, let's understand, how do you get to a device that is 4,000 or 5,000 shillings, right? To get there, you have to be able to design for scale, right? So at the beginning of your development journey, as you're doing the proof of concept, you're designing basically for the features of that product that you're going to deploy, right? So that device may be 5 to 6 to 10 times the cost of the device that you will eventually deploy, right? But as you're going through that cycle of product development, what you'll end up doing is optimizing on the design, optimizing on manufacturing, optimizing on supply chain to be able to drive down to that cost of 4,000, 5,000 shillings, right? How are we involved in that particular project? At this point, not yet. As I mentioned, this particular project will start off, and what we assume is it'll start off with basic assembly of a phone and hopefully get into more advanced manufacturing, which is where I hope we will then come in. And then please remind me on your last question, because you asked three bit.
The laptop project.
So the laptop project, as we currently understand, it is not no longer ongoing, but maybe I'll pass over to Dr. Kimeli here from JQuat, who may have some more information on that.
So thank you. I think on the laptop project, there is an agreement which was signed by one of the previous governments, And that laptop assembly was given to Moi University and JQAT. At JQAT, we have an assembling unit for what we call the it's branded Taifa laptop, but it's just done, and it mainly targets the primary education. So those laptops that are being assembled, they were normally supplied to primary schools. But I think with the change of government, somehow that has somehow died off. But the assembly unit is there. So if the need is there, they can be able to assemble more laptops. But that's at our industrial park. So that is something which goes on.
So the key thing, if you recall the statistic, the figure that Latif shared, if you do contract manufacturing, in other words, somebody comes to you with their IP and says, this is the IP for a laptop, manufacture it for me because you have the setup, the maximum you can earn is 7%. If you're like Foxconn or such company that's doing surface mount technology, meaning the components are actually being placed on the board. The board doesn't come already placed. And then you put it and assemble it into a phone. Now, what was being done, if I'm correct, Dr. Kimwele, at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology and at Moi University was assembly because the boards were already done outside, right? So I think the value in Kenya is something on the level of 1 or 2% or maybe 3%, if I'm not wrong. And so, and then what Dr. Kimwele has shared is that project, because of government policy, obviously it was driven by the government. Very good thinking, establish it in a university where the young people can come and learn about how it's designed and so on and so forth, is stalled. So the plant is there, there's money invested, but it's not moving. So it would be very important for a policy directive by the new government to determine what should happen to the facility, because it sits in 2 different universities, and it can be used and used to great effect if there's a proper policy that can coherently put it together. So thanks for that question. Anybody else? Katangu's in the front.
Hi. Can you hear me? Hi. Tangus Koech, Gearbox consultant. So my question's around manufacturing for Kenya and manufacturing for Africa. So for instance, if I go and see my utility meter, let's say my electricity meter comes from Hexel in China. My water meter comes from Shengda in China, right? These are not very complex things to manufacture, and as Latif has stated, essentially we have the capability to manufacture these things ourselves, to design these things ourselves. Now, Kamau, you had mentioned that there is certain things, like for instance, that you have to get in place before something actually becomes manufacturable and something actually, before an economy actually becomes mature enough to be able to manufacture things for its economy. And my question is around, is it a policy issue that is preventing us from actually, for instance, installing built in Kenya and designed in Kenya products, or are there no built in Kenya, buy in Kenya products? I just wanted your thoughts on that, both to Dr. Kamau and Latif.
Thanks for the question. And yeah, it speaks directly to what we've been talking about, and that is that you need to, the economic complexity map that you saw with all those little dots is where you would like to go so that your competitiveness in making any particular thing is high. Currently, if I take even just a simple bolt made of steel, any engineering student in second year can design that thing. But to make it in Kenya so that when it's on the shelf in the hardware, it's actually competitive with the one coming from India or outside of the country is not that easy based on this economic complexity, because maybe the grade of steel you require is not available, or if it is, it'll be very expensive. Maybe there aren't the machines that you need, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that we are trying to push as a policy sort of lobby position, if you like, as our part of this community, is that we should try to build specific capacities through government procurement, is what I said earlier. In other words, if the government makes it so that certain industries will grow because they tell them that they will procure with government taxpayer money those particular products, and then do everything necessary, like was a very good start with the electronics assembly plants in the universities, that sort of thing, and then build on it and say, at that very university, there should be research to design a computer so that it's a Kenyan designed computer. So then you go now into the 93% because IP is held by Kenyans rather than, but then versus buying a computer from, say, Dell or something. And that's where, again, the government comes in. And this is how a lot of brand names have been developed in countries like China, in India, in Malaysia, and so on. They actually make sure that the market favors the local production. And so that's what I mean. So you begin with preferences or preferential treatment by the government, and then you grow capacity. And perhaps it can also be that you push it on the continent through COMESA and places. So like with Gearbox, we're very proud right now to have been approached by UNDP to design a Gearbox-like entity in 10 other African countries. And that number has now risen to 13 countries. So the money has been spent, and it would be a very, what we're trying to see is, can we overlay a policy in those countries so that whatever's developed in any of those Gearbox-like platforms at those universities in those countries can then be bought by that government. And so you start having an African market that's preferentially favoring its own manufacturers and its own brand names for the benefit of the economy. So that's really, I think, one of the ways it can happen, and it's a tried and tested way. It's been done, especially in the Far East. It's happening in countries like India and so on. And interestingly, it's sort of counter to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which sort of pushes for no tariffs, open borders. But it's very difficult for a country like Kenya or a manufacturer in a country like ours who just starts to manufacture something to compete with maybe a company from Germany who's been making that product for 70 years and has so much knowledge. So how do you, without some kind of preferential treatment or a very well-structured joint venture with that German company or a Chinese company or whoever, so that now the ownership is also local, as then you go and get market share jointly. That's what we've done with Gearbox Europe. So that's just a few comments on that from me.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. So I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there have actually been 3 hardware events in Kenya. And I say events purposefully. So the first hardware event, and by hardware meaning building and design and manufacture of hardware. So the first hardware event was the policy that said all passenger service vehicles in Kenya must have a speed governor, and those speed governors should be procured from local companies. That actually spurred a lot of innovation by local startups to design speed governors. Some of those startups manufactured their speed governors locally. Some of them manufactured their speed governors outside. The next event was the DLP project, where we ended up with great capacity at Moore University, great capacity at JQuat to assemble laptops. The third event that is happening is now the mobile phone that is coming into play now. So why do I say events? Events start and stop, right? And what we need is a journey where these things are happening intertwined on each other. So all the capacity that's happened in the first event is leading into capacity for the second event and leading into capacity for the third event. So we're building upon successes. And unfortunately, up until now, everything has been discrete events, not intertwined, not connected, and that prevents us from leveraging the capacity that exists in this country, right? So to answer your question, and it's really a chicken versus egg question, right? It's the egg has to come first, and the egg meaning what is the right policy to put in place that can unlock this journey. So if I was to say, okay, how do you do that? It can be the phone on one end, but it can also be on smart meters, on utility meters, saying, let's design utility meters that make sense for Africa. Let's put the utility companies with the universities on R&D to create a device that really works best for us. Let's enable local startups to manufacture or design or help design these products. Let's enable startups to build services on top of this hardware, right? So if you have a utility device that is streaming water usage, how can a fintech or an AI ML company that is based in Kenya take that data and build services that add value on top of that? And once you do that, you're creating a value chain, right, of people who have created solution, who are owning IP, and then that IP can be leveraged across multiple other markets.
Yes, please.
I think for me, I would want to add two things. One of it is there is also a problem with the customer, because majority of us is like we don't trust that which is locally made. So I think going forward, I don't know what we need to do, whether we should whip people, sensitize them. We tried it with our laptop, because at some point it's a requirement on our university that every first year should come with a laptop. So there's a time we used to insist they should buy our locally assembled laptop. But at some point, some students and parents started resisting. So I think that's a problem which going forward we should also be able to deal with. So as we also encourage companies like Gearbox and others to come up with local solutions, local designs, how many of us are willing, for example, to buy what you have? Then the other thing is, in terms of innovations, I would be hesitant for us to wait for legislation and policies to be put in place. Just move on, come up with whatever it is you would want to come up. Policy and legislation will follow you. Because like he said, he worked in a public university like me. Public institutions, governments, they are very bureaucratic and slow. So if you are to wait for the legislation and policies to be put in place before you start innovation, we may never get anywhere. So let's just get started. Then at some point, people will wake up and realize, oh, this is something which is going on, is shaping up. They'll try to cause a legislation to be able to regulate what is that we have come up with.
Yeah, so I think that's a really important point, is our own lack of confidence in our own products. So like, I've seen people who come and say they've devised something and then they call it something like a German name instead of calling it Kamau, because if you came into the marketplace and you came and saw a computer written Kamau, would you buy it? A question for you to think about. Another question, yes, at the back, and then we can come to the guy in glasses and, near the front, near the middle. Oh, okay, fine. There's somebody at the back after, eh? Yeah.
Okay, good morning.
Morning.
My name is Festus.
I don't think we can hear very clearly.
My name is Festus. I did not come from science, but I was from humanities at Kenyatta University. But I have just some 4 concerns. Number one is that I know Gearbox, you have right thinking and you have good products, but have you tried to engage the government to promote local manufacturing? Because I think that is one of the greatest impediments. We have very good products actually being made locally. Like Uhuru Kenyatta started promoting wearing of local clothes, apart from just importing maybe a suit from Turkey. You can just wear like from our local textiles here in the country, and it was working. So I think engaging the government so that the government can actually even push back some of the imports, and so that it can promote our local products. I think that one is much important. Engaging the government so that it can promote what we produce locally. Then number 2, what I wanted to know is that, climate change is a pertinent issue globally, and Kenya needs to be at par with it. Does the Gearbox, has it plans to come up with technologies that are climate smart? That's my second concern. And then my third concern is from the professor about automation. There are very many ventures for automation in this country. But the problem we're having is actually technophobia. There's even a possibility we can even phase out all touts in town by just putting robots at every stage of where vehicles come and stop. So the robots can just announce if somebody is going to Kavangware, the robots just pick and the people enter the vehicle. But people really want to have a social human face so that they can talk to. So I think that's also another concern, which maybe, like even in the hospital, we can have even robots, maybe just introducing patients to the hospital. But we still have a long way because people really want to have that face value. So we need to sensitize even our people as well. And then the last one, which of course it could be very sensitive, is about technology. You know, technology actually has come too far. We are aware actually in Africa we've been lagging behind in terms of technology. Most of the challenges that we have, even with people who are coming with the new regimes of education, we are saying that if somebody has maybe a plan to come up with a technology, like wants to develop a helicopter, how many of us will trust to board that helicopter?
Okay, so the question is about the trust. The same point he had made about
the point is,
trusting our own.
I think it is also important to just accept the technology that is coming to us, and then what is important is actually try to improve on its innovation.
Okay.
The innovation, what that technology can do.
Right.
But I just want to mention something, my friend.
Briefly, please, because there's two other questions.
Briefly,
we need to give everyone a chance.
From what I know, because I know that science deals with the tenets and concepts. And then technology is what science creates. For example, a mobile phone. And innovation is actually the service that we can get from that mobile phone. For example,
so the question.
So the thing is, my question is, why can't we just encourage our young people to come up with innovations rather than actually destroying their mental powers trying to come up with the technology? Yet other countries are too far in terms of competition. Okay. Thank you very much. It's just a concern, but it's very sensitive.
Yes, thanks very much.
But I actually like what Gearbox and other companies are actually doing so that we can promote innovation and technology in our country. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, yeah. Okay, we'll take the other two and then we'll answer them all together. The one at the back and then the one with the glasses nearer the middle.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Kiko Muo from Mangaza Elimu and Education Technology Company. Great presentation, and I'm really excited with the work that we've seen hardware being built for Africa. But the question is, are we really looking at the focus of the human capital? We all deploying these solutions, but are we putting enough effort to build the talent, or we gonna rely on, again, importing talent to support all these hardware that we're doing? Are we seeing enough of umbrellas for hardware? I mean, I get sick when I keep seeing people focusing more on software training and saying, no, software is what makes more sense. And I mean, software will not run without the hardware. So how do we make it really compelling to ensure that we can tap into the potential? And we know that by 2035, Africa is going to produce the biggest workforce than the rest of Africa. Yeah.
Okay, very good point. Thank you. Next one, and then we'll take the gentleman here here nearer the front. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karaoke Abel, a software engineer and a digital marketer. My question is all about the environmental conservation. Since in Kenya, we have a lot of, let me say, electronic waste. So what's Gearbox plan in dealing with reusable electronic parts so that we can conserve our environment?
Okay, so I think very good questions. Let me take the couple that were directed to me very quickly. and to say, well, first of all, there's a sense, there's a question around what is Gearbox doing about this or that. Gearbox is a platform for you, for innovators to come to. So we don't sit and decide policy so much or anything. We come and try to serve the people who are within our space. So if somebody comes and then they want to develop a climate change type technology, we try to support them as much as we can. We've connected with Strathmore, there's a Kenya Climate Innovation Center, which is, we've partnered in the past with them quite closely. And so there are quite a few of the companies there that we've looked at their technology. And so somebody might be thinking of designing something that tackles climate change or serves the climate change issue. And they believe that the device that they need can only be bought from, say, India or China or something, because they're not aware that it can be done. They may not be engineers, for example, or they may not be aware that it can be done locally. So that we would then come and help them to assess whether there's a way that it can be done locally that will mean it's cheaper, and of course all the other benefits like jobs and so on. So that's pretty much how to look at Gearbox. But I thank you very much, both you and the first gentleman, for your kind words about Gearbox and what we do. In terms of looking at the question of human resource development, that one is critical, and I think all of us can speak to it. And the thing that we're trying to do, especially that question from the back, how do you develop talent within the hardware space? We're looking at Gearbox, but what we're trying to do with our academy is to fill the gap that is very evident to students at universities. So in a university, we talked about how fast the technology is changing globally. So in a university, to change the curriculum to keep up with the pace of change in technology is very difficult. There are a lot of administrative structures. You have to go through what we call the university senate to present new subjects, and back and forth. It could be a whole year before your curriculum is accepted. And by that time, technology has already gone forward, and so you're going to need to change it again. So what we're trying to do at Gearbox, and Tangu's here in the front is helping us to do this, is to create short courses that can be consumed by those very students at the universities, but also anybody else outside who feels they have the aptitude. And we're using an approach called mastery-based education. We've all heard a lot about CBC, competence-based, but ours is mastery-based, and that really speaks to the fact that you're expected to demonstrate full understanding of the subject matter through interviews, through demonstration, and so on. Very hard, very hands-on oriented. So you come in, it's not theoretical at all. And again, that's something that is a complaint by a lot of university students, that they've heard about microcontrollers and microprocessors. They covered it in a subject within class, but they never touched, felt, programmed one. And so they feel they have a little bit of what's called imposter syndrome, that you're saying you're an engineer of this caliber, but yet you have never actually handled this kind of technology. So they tend to throng within Gearbox Academy to learn and to, in a very interactive way, to learn the technologies. Again, we have a very flexible way of teaching. So the course, we don't talk about how long is the course. We don't say, is the course 3 months? We say, on average, it'll take you 3 months. But you may take a shorter time, you may take a longer time. So we try to individualize, and technologies allow that to happen as much as possible. And we also don't say that the semester begins on a certain date. The semester for you will begin when you walk in. And so these are a lot of flexibilities that we want to be able to present to the public to take up what we're offering. So again, the questions relating to technology, the gentleman with a white hat, and how we can develop it locally, I think that's something that we've been speaking to while we've been here for a while. And you're absolutely right that it's very important for us to encourage our own innovators to come up with solutions to our own problems, because they're best placed. Let me pass over to Dr. Kimwele. You can pick up any aspect that you would like.
I think to start off with your question, I can holistically say this. We are where we are by choice on some aspects. I think most of us, we have been around and we have seen resistance to change, where you try to move matatus from the central business district. Their leaders come complain, you try to reform this, so and so comes complaining. So we can automate most of the things which we do. But now there is also the other aspect. What do you do with these people who are actually doing these jobs? So they have families, they have bills to food and other things. So that's something should be done with a bit of caution, because you also do not want to do automation. Then the next thing you are barring all the people who had employed. But on our curriculum, what I would want us to do is let's work together. I agree with him. There is a bit of rigidity in the way in which curriculum developed, changed, and so on. But part of it is because the structures we have, like you start a 4-year curriculum, can only be reviewed after a full cycle. It has to go through some structures. Finally, it has to go to the Regulator Commission for University Education. And that takes time. But that doesn't stop you from learning additional skills to be able to complement what is that you have learned. Then the other thing which you can also be able to do to circumvent what people may consider to be curriculum which is maybe outdated and so on, as students do projects, we are insisting on students working with the industry. Bring to us the industry the industry knows what they would want to do. But then these students, we would want them to solve a real problem, a real challenge. So that when we work together, we can be able to address some of these problems in the short run, as opposing to pointing fingers, the university should do this, the industry should do this. That way, I think we don't help each other in any way. But when we get to sit, we have seen players come to us, they tell us, we have these things, we want people to come up with innovation around this. Then we tell the student, okay, now that we are supposed to do for their projects, this is what this partner wants for you to do our projects around. Then we co-supervise the students with the partner, and it becomes a win-win situation to all of us. Because the partner will help me co-supervise the student will end up doing a project. The partner will also ensure his or her goals are met, and everybody is happy in the long run. So I think that's, to me, what we can be able to do in the short term as we also try to fix our curriculum. But I think, and this is also what makes me proud as an African. Africa happens to be the only continent whose population is growing. So in terms of human capital, then we are far much ahead of the other continents. So with that, there is a lot of interest and focus on Africa, and we are not very careful. We love, and this has been happening, most of our good talent is taken by other countries. So we should be able to train to sharpen our skills so that we compete globally with other people from other parts of the world. I'm aware of some countries where, for as long as they can be able to recruit you, and you go and train, you also go and work there as you also train. So we have been discussing with some agencies from some countries, some renowned ones. I don't want to mention names here. But this is something which is happening because they are realizing their population is aging and they need people to think and drive their development. So they are looking up to Africa. So Africa, in addition to our own issues which we are trying to address, the other people have also seen an opportunity which they are trying to tap into.
Thank you. I think we've almost run out of time, but Latif, if you could speak to those questions.
So I'll give, on the example of the question about climate change, an example there is a company called Airco, based out of Makerere University in Kampala. They design and deploy air quality monitoring sensors all across East Africa and West Africa. So they design the product and we manufacture that for them. And they're adding value specifically around climate change. On the aspect of e-waste, right? E-waste doesn't happen just at the end of the life cycle of the product. It actually happens at the beginning stage of the product. How do you design this product to be repairable? How do you design this product to have a long life? Contrary to current consumer electronics that is designed to be replaceable and thrown away, changing the mindset to say, how do you really add value? And that, again, comes from our mindset of we're very economically and cost conscious, so we don't want to keep changing our devices all the time. So many startups are approaching that from a natural standpoint, saying, I know my customer doesn't want to replace this device every year, so I need to design it so that it can last, and design it so that parts that fail can be replaced and repaired, so that device is not ending up in the landfill in a very small part of time. On the end of the life cycle, what we're doing is partnering with some of the e-waste organizations in the region to understand all the devices we manufacture, what what happens at the end of their life cycle. What can be reclaimed, how can it be properly disposed of, and looking at that. And that's a very important aspect on that. And then the last thing about education and building capability. It has to be an ecosystem approach. Capability comes from universities, that's one, but also capability comes from peer-to-peer learning, engagement with communities, and these communities are actually growing really rapidly. You will find hardware communities in every university in the country and every university in East Africa. So it's a matter of just connecting these communities together so they can collaborate and build on the skills that they're working on. And again, learning is a journey, right? You don't learn and say I'm an expert. You keep building and leveraging that skill that you've learned. Thank you.
Lifelong learning, as they call it. So unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. It's a topic that we could really be talking about all day long. I'll just mention one or two things very briefly. From the point of view of climate change, there's a company that's here, they're exhibiting, and if you can look for them, they're called Octavia Carbon. It's an amazing company. Some engineers, Kenyan engineers, have designed a way to capture carbon, and if you were here for the governor's speech yesterday, he pointed it out. And at COP27, they were a hit. Everybody was coming to watch because they're basically taking the carbon through a machine, sucking it in, and then depositing it as compounds inside a geological formation, which is quite unique to this part of the world, in the Rift Valley. And then you've got geothermal energy to power it. So they have there's a similar one in Iceland, I think, and elsewhere, but the Kenyan one is probably the cheapest in the world. So it's a fantastic technology developed by our own engineers that could have an impact on climate change globally. And that is the kind of talent that we've got in this country. Speaking again of, I think it was you, Dr. who mentioned, or either one of you, as people who are outside of the country, the diaspora so-called, who are doing phenomenal things. Dr. Ochieng from Imperial College is one of the people who brought GPS to the world. He was part of the team that actually made GPS a technology that we all use. We have Charlie Mwangi at Tesla, well, used to be at Tesla, who led more than 200 engineers to create perhaps the most advanced auto manufacturing plant in the world, and others all over, many, many others. So again, from a policy perspective, if the government is able to make it possible for such diaspora people to have a connection to Kenya and be able to be part of what's happening in terms of our industrialization, it could mean a whole lot. You've heard of the Taiwan Semiconductor Company, which is responsible for most of the microchips that are in the world, silicon processing. That was a diasporan, a Taiwanese man who grew up in America, who at a certain age, at a certain point in his career, he had developed the technology in the US. It wasn't really being picked up as he would have liked. There wasn't that much awareness at the time of his vision. And the Taiwanese government invited him back to set it up in Taiwan. And so that people, individuals, can be hugely impactful in terms of the journey towards industrialization. And Kenya, Africa generally, we should be thinking along those lines ourselves very much. So I think, I'm sure there are many more questions, but we'd just like to thank you so much for coming to this session. And hopefully we can have a few discussions afterwards if anybody has any more questions. But very welcome to you all. And I hope that the rest of the week is very productive for you. Thanks very much.